Hello, my name is Ann Spencer, and I'm a product person. And in a former life, I was the data editor at O'Reilly Media, which I had the honor of being Pete's editor. And we have had so many conversations over the last decade or so, I want to say, about what's going on in the world, what's going on with data. And we both thought it would be a great idea to record some of our chats, right? About some of our thinking, some
Yeah,
of the things we're working on, and what's going on. So I'm thrilled that we're going to be doing this sort of chat series.
yeah, and I'm Pete. I like to say I've been doing AI since before it worked. Um, I was one of the original founders of TensorFlow at Google, and I've been having a blast just helping people build machine learning products and projects over the last few years. And I've always had such a fun time talking to Anne about all of this stuff because she's very much involved in the day to day, seeing how projects actually work in practice. Um, and so I thought it would be a great chance to just have a chat between ourselves and, just share it with anybody else who's interested.
I love this idea. And I was also thinking about you the other day because I just came back from an AI and law event, right? So there's so much going on. But one of the slides in particular that made me think of you is one of the speakers put up this slide that said, not all AI is Gen AI, which instantly made me think about the most recent blog post that you have. So I'm like, I think there's a story there because my sense is that Pete is feeling something similar, right? And for those of you who are watching or listening, the most recent blog post is the long, strange journey of language models, right? And so when I read it, probably because I also know Pete for quite a bit, I'm like, I feel like there's a story behind why there's an inspiration behind this. But what one of the things that I got away from this was how it's very like you, right? To show, hey, let's take a step back. Let's think about what this is, what the origin point is through the lens of history. Like, how did we get to where we are today? Um, how do I demystify this for people, right? In terms of that level of context and provide insight of what's possible and what's next, but very grounded, right, in reality. Which is what I love it. And I one of the things I love working with you, especially when I was your editor, was how you were able to distill some concepts that I think get bloated by other people, right? Maybe they're just so used to the jargon, or maybe they're so used to not talking to everyday people that they forget, right? And that was one of the reasons why I love when we worked together on articles and books and stuff, was I thought we were both very much towards how do we make this accessible for everyone, right? How do we bring everyone to the table, to the conversation, to move everyone forward? And there were so many things in your posts, I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions about it, but I absolutely got that away from, oh yes, history grounded, inspiration for the future. um, I would love for you to talk a little bit about the autocomplete aspect and how you came to that level of description. That's what I mean by simplifying it, right,
Yeah,
for everyone.
yeah.
So how did it come about, right? I have some theories because I know you for such a long time, but I would love to hear, the inspiration behind the piece.
Yeah, really, this all came about because I've been talking about what we've been doing useful with journalists and some of the models that we're sort of putting out there and some of the work we're doing. And the immediate question that I get is like, "Oh, is this a large language model?" And I realized that led me into like half an hour of explanation of what a language model is. And usually people got bored and wandered off like 5 minutes into it. So I was like, okay, let's see if I can actually um, explain why that's such a complicated question, um, and what language model actually means, because we're all used to just saying LLM, language
Mm,
model, large language
mhm,
model,
for
to
sure, for
describe
sure.
things like ChatGPT.
Mhm,
Um, and the term language model actually has been around since the 50s, and it it's got this really interesting history, which is why I end up geeking out about it.
mhm,
Um, but I really just wanted a way of putting it all together and saying, this is what language models are.
Right.
Like, and this is how the term has gone from being this kind of obscure piece of technical jargon for just a small part of the pipeline to becoming almost like a brand name for chatbots, and a brand name for AI. And then Gen AI is probably a whole nother other
Oh,
blog
that's all. Yeah,
post.
that's a whole other session, right?
But I really just wanted to dive into, okay, what does the term language model even mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things I really loved about the piece was how you talked about it was a hacky statistical background, and then it morphed into something different. But that made me think about the space in general, and that is something I really enjoy about the space. I know you talk about it having a Cinderella moment, but it's also other aspects in the space, like Python, for example, was it considered low status? Uh, Definitely blew up into something different, right? It is ubiquitous. And I think that's also an amazing thing about the space, that sometimes something that's low status, low level, kind of hacky can be morphed and evolved into something else. Right. And I think that's why I liked your post so much, because you're talking about, hey, like let's take a step back and think about the history of this. It's both inspirational because you're thinking about this is what's possible, right? You just don't know what's possible if enough people come into it and enough applications come into it. What happens if we have even more data, right? And then we can even solve even more problems that we thought was possible. It's no longer just autocomplete at that point, right? But I think that's what I really liked about the piece. It was like that mix of, hey, let's learn from the history, right? But let's still be inspired, right? You also talked about challenging your perception of intelligence. Could you unpack that a little bit for me about that?
Yeah, and part of the history of language models is they've always been this um, kind of fix-up piece for what was considered to be like the real AI. Like you'd
Mm-hmm.
have these incredibly complicated models that would try and produce, text, whether it's transcribing speech or doing translation or answering questions. And you'd have this little bit at the end, which was essentially autocomplete saying, oh, we're going to like fix up the text so it kind of makes sense, as kind of a final pass. And if you'd asked people, I think even 5 years ago, hey, a language model's going to lead to any kind of AI, people would have laughed, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I really like about this field is like all of the experts are constantly being proven wrong, including myself. And that is just a really fun environment to work in. And the language model stuff especially, um, it really is astonishing that these simple things, which are predicting the next word given a series
Mm-hmm.
of words, that's
For
the
sure.
task that they're solving. So,
Mm-hmm.
really, is fundamentally autocomplete. Um, that they can solve all of these problems that we thought would require really advanced symbolic AI approaches. Because one of the reactions to my blog post was there were some people who were saying, "Oh, look, you see, ChatGPT is just autocomplete. See, it can't be, it can't actually be any kind of intelligence." And I was disappointed because my takeaway was, wow, we can mimic intelligence
Mm-hmm.
to a
Yeah.
degree that we can't actually tell the difference using
Mm-hmm.
autocomplete. Like, I think that reflects something back onto how intelligence works. Like, if you think about how we're having this conversation, we're not thinking about every single word ahead of time because we don't have the sort of, the conscious ability to kind of have those queued up. I feel like a lot of what we're doing is that very automatic, um, stringing words together to represent the thoughts that we are trying to put across. But what it left me wondering was like how much of our intelligence is actually similar to autocomplete and just kind of, following some predictable statistical patterns that are guided by some, maybe there's some more advanced, like high level thinking that's doing the planning. But if most of what we're doing in answering questions is just autocomplete, isn't that interesting?
For sure, I could see that because we're used to running things through our heads, right? Like stories or notions or experiences. So when we're having a conversation, like between you and I, if we haven't seen each other in a while, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. How do we pull things from our history or what is known
Yeah,
already, and what's the most frequent, or is this going to land or not when you're talking to journalists and stuff, right?
yeah,
Uh, I also think that's something when I watch how people have reacted to Chat GPT about the personalization aspects of it, right? I go back and forth depending on the day or the project about how
yeah,
I feel about it, to be quite honest, right? One of the things that I really love about being human is that we do have our histories, but we can actually decide, even
yeah,
though it's the most frequent thing that we've experienced, say, and then we can go, no.
yeah.
Like, something else, or maybe it's just like me just stirring the pot a little bit, right? But it's
Yeah,
just that's I can see both sides. Maybe that's why I love talking to you about things, because your post is so pragmatic but so inspirational at the same time. You're like autocomplete, but inspiration, right?
yeah.
There's a that's why I love talking to you about this kind of stuff. So I thank you for providing the context about the intelligence part of it.
Well, it kind of also reminds me what you were saying there of, I feel like a lot of a lot of my therapy sessions are talking about patterns that
Yes,
I'm
right.
that I'm into, and how to break those patterns when they aren't serving me. But how much of those patterns kind of like just autocomplete, that
I
say that, yeah,
absolutely you're just living your day, right?
yeah,
Just well,
yeah.
yeah, because it would be too exhausting trying to think of every
Oh, trying to
micro
reason
moment.
stuff through logically every single second. Yeah.
That would be so exhausting
Yeah.
on so many levels. Oh my goodness. So what other kind of reactions did you have to the blog post, right? You had some people wondering, oh, wait a minute, it's just, autocomplete, there's nothing special about it. You're like, no, no, no. What other kinds of reactions did you have to the blog post after you put it out?
So I did have a lot of people saying that it, sort of thinking through how this actually worked was helpful for them actually approaching things like
Mm,
Chat GPT, and thinking about, because prompts and all, context and all of this other stuff can seem very, very mysterious. Um, and it can feel, they often get broken up into, different sections and given different names. And if you're actually able to kind of step back and say, okay, this is really a glorified version of one of those like social media games where somebody asks, somebody puts in, asks you to put in I am a, and then click the first selection from autocomplete to finish the rest of the sentence. It helps me really understand and kind of have a better feel for how to work with these things. Um,
mm.
they're much less mysterious, kind of like monoliths from 2001, and much more. Okay, this is actually a mechanism. This is a bunch of machinery. This is what it's trying to do, and happily and surprisingly, we can actually get these really interesting results out of it. But it's not doing anything that's really outside our realm of understanding in terms of just like what it's being asked to do and what the mechanism's actually doing.
For sure. So that's also something that you mentioned, I think, towards the end of the post about, almost like demystifying it, but also thinking about, oh, I'm really excited about what the potential applications could be, commercial, like for reals, right? Not just
Yeah.
theory. So what are some of the actual applications that, that you think will be really useful, or that you think people are going to be really excited about, or could potentially be in the future? It could be sci-fi, like, oh, it could be really cool if it was this, right? I would
Yeah,
love to
well,
hear that.
I mean, I always come back to my, I want to be able to look at a lamp and say on and have it come on. That's the root of a lot of what I'm working on. But what I'm most interested in, and I'm sort of stepping a bit into the Gen AI debate here,
Okay. Okay.
but um, there's this whole class of having these LLMs actually create stuff for us, but there's also having them understand what we're saying, understanding natural language. So if you could look at a thermostat and say, I'm getting a bit hot, can you turn it down? Or, oh, can you turn it down, half an hour after sunset? Or, all these different ways that you can talk to things and actually have them understand you.
Hmm.
Um, and in technical terms, that's usually known as the speech to intent
Right.
problem. I
Hmm.
find that way more interesting than having the computer kind of talk to me. I really want the computers to listen better. Um,
You don't want it to be a parrot. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating. Speech to intent. Are there any papers or anybody in that space that you think that people should dive deeper into? Right. I'm
I
always
think,
asking you something like this. So,
yeah,
yeah.
no, and I think just, the thing that helped me was finding that, because I was looking at, speech to action, text to action, but speech
Yeah.
to intent seems to be the right keywords to put into like Google Scholar
Yep.
to really
Yep.
find some of the papers in this area. And a lot of them are sort of pre LLM,
Hmm.
but the the challenges and the benchmarks and the data sets are very similar. We've now just got this ability to take in a lot more unstructured text and do interesting
Mm,
things with it.
for sure.
Um, I'm, again, not to go off on too much of a tangent, I hate RAG, which is the
Oh, he's stirring the pot.
yes, mostly because most of the customers we deal with, they actually have answers already
Mm,
to
mm,
almost all the questions that users are going to want to
that makes
answer.
sense. That makes sense now. Okay. Yeah.
They
What your
just
customer
can't
said. Okay.
they can't map what users are asking to those questions, and so that's where the speech
Mm,
to intent
yeah.
um, part becomes really interesting.
It's never going to be a conversation with between you and I unless you stir the pot a bit or a lot.
Yeah. Well, I've got an upcoming blog post where I'm anyway. I won't spoil it too much, but I'm definitely definitely going to ruffle a few feathers. So
Oh, but
stay
that's so
tuned.
normal. That's
Yes.
so normal. But that's one of the reasons why I love like working with you on stuff. It's just because you're just very real about this, but also this.
Oh, you're making me blush. It's one of the reasons I love working with you too. It's like you actually are so good at delving into stuff yourself and just like following the threads on this. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so funny because when you're talking about the speech to intent and you're talking about the history even before all this stuff, that's this what you covered in the blog post, right? The
yeah,
historical lens.
exactly.
Let's look at this historical lens. Let's think about what's happening now. How has it been impacted? And then what's next? Right? Like that's and then you even win that with some of the other stuff. So I think that when we talk about patterns, that's definitely one of your patterns with blog
Well,
posts and sessions and stuff, right? So
well, honestly, my blog in a lot of ways is my long-term memory because it's my notebook because a lot of this stuff I've had to, I don't consider myself a particularly fast learner. I really have to. This is Abby, by the way. She is really tired of me just talking on the computer and wants me to play fetch with her. So she's gate crashing, the cutie pie. Um, but yeah, I really find I have to go through it pretty slowly and look at the history and really try and to be able to wrap my head around this stuff properly. So I the pattern is there because I really don't feel like I understand something until I can explain it
mhm.
to somebody else. So
Oh,
for things that
absolutely.
yeah, which
Yeah.
you've been fantastic at too. and you have a history of doing the same thing, so I know you
Oh,
understand.
for sure. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I loved being an editor, right? Was being able to talk to all the different authors about some of the cutting edge things we're working on. And then by having to explain it, by having to distill it, then it was easier to internalize, right?
Yeah,
Especially running off of a platform that we were being super accessible, bringing everyone to the table with data science, no matter what your background was. Like, it is way harder to do that than it is just to think about the super top level
yeah,
stuff all the time, right? Like, um, so I appreciate that, and I think it's good for people to know that from someone of your background and what you've accomplished, that you do have to iterate, right?
oh my
That
god.
you do write
And
it down and you rerun it, and it isn't something that you get like instantly off the gate, right? I think there is a lot of people that feel that in when it comes to
well,
tech or whatnot,
and
right?
I'm constantly googling how to sort a Python list. If if that's reassuring to anybody, like my Stack Overflow search history is long and active. So anybody feeling imposter syndrome,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. I'm always researching stuff. I'm always like going, what's okay, that term, this term, how does this make connections? I'm always drawing stuff too, like writing things down to figure out how things are connected. My own version of a graph, like my own version of a knowledge graph. It's just I think in this space, it's something that you have to do. You always have to learn and you always have to challenge your assumptions, right? Because you get things like this. You get things like,
yeah,
what we're talking about today. Because if
yeah,
we didn't, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I think that's great. But
yeah.
I think we're close to our time,
I think the
right?
dogs are going to eat me if I don't if I don't go and look after them. So thank you so much, Anne. This has been really fun. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
doing some more of these.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. It was good to catch up. It's always good to chat, right? And I look forward to the next one.
yes. Thanks, Anne.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
everybody.
Bye.